Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the previous lesson, we studied the introduction to Abhari's Isagoji, and we saw that his first proper section on logic is a section on language. And after we saw that, we posed the question, does logic need language? This question motivates the first section of Abhari's Isagoji, which we will start in the next lesson. And in order to answer this question, we need to understand the meaning of two terms. We need to understand the meaning of the term logic and the meaning of the term language. The meaning of the term logic we've already seen. We know that logic is the rules of correct reasoning. But what about language? What is the meaning of language? Let's take an example. Let's take an example of the statement, the man is standing. The man is a part of the statement, the man is standing, and the man is a collection of sounds. It's a verbal expression that I make with my vocal cords and my tongue and the inside of my mouth, the man. When I make this verbal expression, when I say the man, my saying the man signifies something. Signification is a very important concept in Islamic logic. Verbal expressions signify meanings. The meanings are normally mental representations. So the verbal expression, the man, signifies a mental representation. The mental representation of the concept of the man that I'm talking about, could be anybody, could be you, it could be me. This mental representation of the concept of a man also signifies something. It signifies the extramental object. Extramental means outside the mind. So extramental object is the actual man outside the mind. So the verbal expression, the man, signifies the mental representation of the man that's inside my mind. And that mental representation of the man that's inside my mind signifies the actual man that's outside the mind. So when we're studying the statement, the man is standing, the first part of the statement is the man. The second part of the statement is standing. Standing is a verbal expression. It's a collection of sounds that I make with my tongue and my vocal cords and the inside of my mouth. And when I make this sound, when I say this verbal expression, I thereby signify something. I signify the concept of standing, which is a mental representation of something that exists outside the mind. There is something called standing outside the mind, when there is an actual man who is standing outside the mind, and therefore there is something called the man, there is something called standing outside the mind. Now, this is an incomplete sentence. I just have the man and standing. In order to make a complete sentence, I need to add the word is. When I add the word or the expression, verbal expression is, when I say the man is standing, when I arrange these particular expressions in this particular way, I compose them. I take individual basic expressions that signify basic meanings, and I compose them to signify a composite meaning, the composite meaning of the man is standing. And this composite meaning of the man standing reflects reality outside the mind. The man is actually standing. So the first group of concepts, these are words, verbal expressions. The expression man, the expression is, and the expression standing. These expressions are what we mean by language. Language is verbal expressions that are said. Language signifies concepts in the mind. The concepts in the mind is where reasoning takes place. When I make a definition, when I make an argument, I arrange concepts, I arrange to make a definition. We'll see I arrange basic concepts. And in order to make an argument, I arrange premises, and premises are composite concepts. This idea of basic and composite concepts and how they're arranged and composed will be the topic of the next lesson. This is Abhari will talk about these things. We're now motivating that by trying to understand why he's going to talk about those things. So reasoning happens in the mind. Logic happens in the mind. The realm of logic is in the mind. It's the arrangement of concepts in the mind. Remember, logic is the rules of correct reasoning. Where are these rules applied? They are applied in the mind. And then finally, I have what's outside the mind. This, in Aristotelian philosophy, would be called the area of metaphysics. Metaphysics was the study of that which exists. In our times, this is the realm partially of modern science. Modern science investigates the physical things that exist in the physical universe, and it's also the realm of kalam, or rational theology, which investigates the existence of non-physical things, most importantly God, but also other non-physical things such as angels. And it's not really restricted to non-physical things. It also talks about physical things such as heaven and hell and the other things that will happen in the afterlife and messengers. But as a complement to science, the most important thing that Kalam investigates is non-physical things. Most important among them is God. Now, these are all very interesting topics, and they can spark a lot of interesting discussion that is interesting both philosophically and religiously. And there's topics in epistemology that I'm sure you have many questions about, or metaphysics or theology or science. But we want to stay focused, and the reason why we are looking at all of this is not to investigate all of these interesting questions, but we are merely trying to understand what is meant by language. And we are trying to understand that because we are trying to answer the guiding question of this lesson: does logic need language? Based on what we've seen, language is verbal expressions that signify mental concepts. Now, and those mental concepts very often signify things that exist outside the world, outside the mind, in the real world, but sometimes they don't, and we'll talk about that as well in a future lesson. So language for now is verbal expressions that signify mental concepts. So now we know what language means. What does logic mean? Logic, we saw, was the rules of correct reasoning. And let's say it a different way. Let's say it that it's the rules of arranging mental concepts to discover new mental concepts. This is what inference is. You take mental concepts, arrange them a particular way, and this takes you to new mental concepts, new knowledge, inferential knowledge. You discover it, you come to know it. So the realm of logic is the tongue, the realm of language, is the tongue, and the realm of logic is the mind. So what's the answer to our question? Does logic need language? We know the meanings of both terms. Well, let's take a scenario. Let's say that I want to learn logic. If I want to learn logic, then what that means is I want to learn how to arrange mental concepts to discover new mental concepts. So I want to learn how to do this with mental concepts in my mind. So there's a teacher of logic, and this teacher of logic will teach me, the student of logic, how to do logic. There's two ways he can teach me. The first way is telepathy. He could simply stare at me and transfer the thoughts from his mind to my mind. And if this was a common phenomenon that everybody could do, then teaching this course would be very easy. I would simply stare at the computer screen and you would understand everything, and I wouldn't need to say anything. But this is not the normal way in which things work. And so normally, if a teacher of logic needs to teach a student of logic, he needs to use language. So somebody who wants to teach logic needs to use language, because the concepts that he will teach, or the concepts that he will talk about, the concepts that he'll teach you how to arrange in your mind, he will get to those concepts by using expressions that signify those concepts. And that's why teachers and students of logic need language. So coming back to our question, does logic need language? You're going to expect me to say, yes, it does, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that logic doesn't need language, properly speaking, because logic refers to the arrangement of concepts in your mind. The realm of logic we saw is in the mind. So if you're doing logic within yourself, if you're thinking about concepts and arranging them and trying to discover new knowledge, then you don't need language. You can just work with mental concepts. Although the logicians do say that we are so used to referring to mental concepts with words that we almost identify the word with the concept and the concept with the word. And so we even think using expressions because of the prevalence and the frequency with which we as human beings use language to refer to signify mental concepts. This is a point that we'll return to briefly in future lessons as well. But technically speaking, doing logic within oneself doesn't need any language. Because logic and reasoning are in the mind, whereas language is on the tongue. So doing logic within oneself doesn't need any language. However, here, what we are trying to do is we're not trying to do logic within ourselves. We are trying to learn logic. And the teacher of logic is trying to do logic to us, trying to teach us logic. And he has to use language. And that's what Abhari is doing, and so he's doing logic to us, and doing logic to or with someone else does need language, because you need to explain to them the rules of correct reasoning. You might want to do language with somebody to teach, you might want to do logic with somebody to teach them logic, and you also more frequently want to do logic with somebody else to show them where their argument went wrong. You're going to use the rules of logic. And so doing logic with someone else does need language. And Abhari is doing logic with us, and so he does need language. And that's why he needs a section on language in his primer on the science of logic, and that's where we will begin in the next lesson. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وهو حسبنا ونعم الوكيل.